Welcome back to Your 1230, the only podcast where our guests tell their story with the help of 12 questions in just 30 minutes. I'm your host, Mike Salitro. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Parrish Collins. Parrish is a civil rights attorney in Albuquerque who's focused on prisoner, medical, and nutritional abuse and neglect cases. Parrish, welcome. We are really excited to be speaking with you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. We wanted to start here. You have quite a impressive tenure in law practice, but you've got also a very specific niche that you are currently focused on. How did you come upon that as this is where I want to focus my time professionally, and these are the kind of cases that are most important to me?
And you're referring to the prison medical?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into politics, but Jeff Sessions was appointed Attorney General, and I didn't think he was going to be particularly friendly towards civil rights, and anyway, I thought I should do a few civil rights cases, and I took a solitary confinement continuing legal education course, and I was looking at it as medical neglect, and anyway, so I somehow I got a call from a prisoner, and I he had a pretty crazy story about a pressure ulcer that was the size of a grapefruit, and you know um I thought he was exaggerating, but I wanted to go see him just to see. So I fought pretty hard to get a camera in, which is not easy to do, to get a camera into a prison. So I went out there to document the injuries, and the pressure ulcer that he had was pretty horrifying. And if anything, he had understated it. And from there, I started getting more and more calls, and the level of cruelty and abuse and neglect is astonishing. It's nothing I could have imagined. And so since taking that first case, the first couple of cases, it's grown into basically an obsession. It's all I do now. It's all our my wife works with me. She doesn't do these kinds of cases, but I have a staff of young paralegals, young law clerks, and legal assistants, and we're all working on the prison medical, and then we work on nutritional issues as well. But I think we've only filed 2 cases regarding the food, but it's something we want to turn our sights on. We just kind of have our hands full a little bit, but the food is it's pretty appalling stuff. It's if you're not it's pretty much all carbs, three meals a day. So if you have diabetes, you're probably not going to do well. You may end up losing body parts. You may end up dying. If you don't have diabetes going in and you have a propensity to diabetes, you're going to have diabetes when you leave. And because the food is just absolutely toxic for someone with diabetes or heart conditions or anything of that nature. So we really need to, start looking into that more. We just, have our hands full with the medical issues.
Okay. And as you describe that, you mentioned starting with a CE or a continuing education course as kind of the introduction into this world. Did you have any idea that there was this much, I guess, abuse or neglect in this space? Or what was your thinking going into that course? And obviously, where you are now, having multiple cases, multiple years in this space.
Well, when I took that course, I took it, well, because a guy that I really like, he's a really good civil rights lawyer, was teaching it, and and I basically needed credits. It was at the end of the year, so it looked interesting, and I took it, and then I was trying to figure out what kind of work I could do in civil rights, and so that kind of it just clicked, and so, but no, I had no idea. I could not have imagined the level of neglect, and we've filed 60 or so far. I have quite a few on my desk that I need to get filed. We could have filed 200 or 300 by now. It is absolutely it's I've started telling people if it's medical and it's prison, it's medical malpractice. And and I that might be a slight exaggeration, but not much. It's the cases that we have are pretty horrific negligence where people, you know, uh, men and women have they might have start showing signs of an infection, complaining of pain and so forth. And, this can go on to the point, for weeks, months where it's just getting progressively worse. They're getting weak. They're getting, they're throwing up. They can't get out of bed. They can't walk, and they're in horrible pain. And they don't get sent to the hospital and they don't get sent out for proper care. And the prisons don't have the wherewithal to treat these infections, or if they do, then it's even worse. But I just don't think they have the capability of treating them. But so what we end up having, a lot of our cases involve these infections that could have been easily managed, easily treated, that end up getting into the spines and hearts. And we have one that got into the brain of one of our clients. And quite a few of those people have died. Most of them don't die, but they're facing lifetime, disability, pretty significant spine damage or heart damage. And what the worst part is, well, I mean, there's so many bad parts of it, that they just watch these guys deteriorate to the point where they can't get out of bed to go to the bathroom. So they have to get help from, people in the pod, or their cell to use the bathroom, which is, not a good thing to have to do in a prison environment. They can't get food. Other inmates are wheeling them down to medical, saying, this guy needs help. There are occasions when even guards are wheeling them down, saying this guy needs help. They still can't get help. And then finally they get sent to the hospital when they're on the brink of death, and that's when we get them. And those are our cases. I mean, we do have quite a few suicide cases with severely mentally ill prisoners that weren't properly monitored, weren't properly treated, weren't provide mental health services or proper medication. And but the great majority of our cases are infections that got out of control, that had they been addressed in a competent, timely manner, would have never got to the point where these guys were hospitalized. So it's yeah, no, I could have never expected that level of kind of indifference and cruelty from medical people. You just don't expect that. And you heard I actually kind of lost it recently in a mediation. The mediator was a retired judge, and he came in. Our client was deceased, and the son was there, and the mediator came in, and pretty much the first thing he said is, to the son, there's a lot of problems with this case. Your son was a drug addict, and I lost it. And the reason being is because that's how they're treated by the medical people. They're not treated like patients. They're treated like prisoners and drug addicts. And and that needs to change. And we're doing what we can to change that, because they're people. A lot of them have, if you ever read the demographics on the prison population, huge rate of learning disabilities, huge rate of dyslexia, you know, and pretty much, I think it's well over 80% have some kind of mental health issues. And so, plus they come from poverty, they come from bad environments, they come from schools that didn't, help them with their learning disabilities. So, they have they're kind of like two strikes coming out of the gate, and it's just one more strike and they end up in prison. So they're the most vulnerable people in society. And I mean, you kind of get this idea that the guards are abusive, or maybe the dangers of the prisoners, but that's not what I found. The guards, I actually like for the most part. There's some bad guards, but there's some bad lawyers, and they're bad realtors, bad doctors, bad this and that. But for the most part, the guards are just trying to do their job. But I never would have expected this kind of treatment from medical personnel, and it's shocking to say the least.
Yeah, it's as you talk about it, it's shocking, it's disappointing, it's really disheartening. But what comes across is your passion for this case, for these cases, for your clients, for the simple vision that these are human beings and they should be treated so. So you started off by describing this has turned into an obsession for you. And when we first talked, and even tonight, it's clear of why this kind of resonates with what you've done, why it makes sense for you to represent uh, your clients in these cases. Given their background and given their limited resources, especially in prison, how are they finding you, or how are they contacting you, or how are you becoming aware of these situations?
Well, like I said, we got those first few calls, and then there's some word of mouth. There's not very many lawyers that will take a call from a prisoner, and even fewer that will actually take a case. So there's not a big population of lawyers that are willing to take these cases. There are some, but not a whole lot. And then what was really interesting or funny, I get a kick out of this. When COVID started, they wouldn't let us visit the prisoners. They wouldn't let us anyone in the prisons or jails here for quite a while. Because of COVID. And they had a good basis for that. It was obviously dangerous, and these prisoners were at pretty high risk, as were the guards. And so they finally let me back in March, and I went in, and I always talk to the guards. Like I said, I like them. There's just guys or women, just trying to do their jobs, and in a tough situation, poorly paid, poorly trained, understaffed, the whole bit. And that's a whole nother conversation. But so I go in and I talk to this young guard on the way back. There are no masks, there's no hand sanitizer or anything. And I'm going back to take a picture again of the guy with the pressure ulcer. And they won't let me in medical anymore because I always end up with a lawsuit when I leave there. And so they took me to the attorney visitation area, and there's called a Sally Port. And that's like, I'm sure you've kind of seen them in TV shows or something. There's like, it's a little room, and there's a locking door on either side. You go in, the door locks behind you, then you have to wait a little bit, and then the next door opens, and then you get into the attorney visitation room. So they came in and set up a makeshift bed, and came in, the medical people, the guards, okay, I don't know, there's probably 5 or 6 people in that little room. And they take his bandages off. No one has on masks, no one has on gloves. And I'd asked the guard on the way back. I said, "Hey, I noticed there's no hand sanitizer or whatever. What are you guys doing about COVID?" He said, "Well, we had a meeting. It was like yesterday, or recent meeting." And he said, "It's a joke. We're not doing anything." So I go back and I send a letter to the prison, to the the governor, and the press. And I pointed out, that they weren't taking precautions. The reporter printed the letter. And then I started getting calls from another prison where a lot of our cases come out of, and they weren't taking any. I mean, the conditions were, it was almost like they were trying to breed COVID, the way they were managing this prison. So I sent a second letter on behalf of 37 inmates, and same thing, Secretary of Corrections, Warden, Department of Corrections, Governor, and the same reporter. He published it again. And then it was funny, someone out at the prison where my guy was with the pressure ulcer put up a sign saying that our firm was responsible for distributing COVID funds to all the prisoners in the state. And so we were just getting, overwhelmed with phone calls, and we talked to every single one of them. And we'd say, "Well, we're not doing that, but how's your health? Anything going on?" And then they put up a second flyer saying we were getting all these prisoners out on compassionate release. for medical reasons. So we got another wave of calls. Same thing, I was just like, well, we can't, that's not possible, but how's your health? And we probably got 30, 40 cases out of it. So it's the best free marketing ever. And it came from the Department of Corrections. So, I always like to give them a shout out for the free marketing. And anyway, so a lot of the prisoners know me now because of that. And plus we filed 60 suits. We get a little bit of press around the state, and we talk to them. We talk to them like human beings. I go visit them if I can, and we treat them like people. And I've had one of my clients, I went out to see him, and they never tell the prisoner that the lawyers come and they say it's security. I think it's because they don't want the prisoner to take the legal file. And then once you're there, you can't say, hey, go back to your cell and get your legal file. So a lot of times I get there and there's no legal file. And I think that's by design. But I got there and the guy's just like, who are you? And I said, I'm your lawyer. And he burst into tears. And he said, you're the first person to come visit me in 3 years. And so we treat them with dignity and respect. And I like them. There's some of them that done some pretty bad things, but you shouldn't be judged by your worst day. And the fact is, a lot of them, like I said, mental health issues, learning disabilities, and drugs are huge. So almost, most of our clients have, drug related charges. It may not be trafficking, but it may be burglary, related to the need to get drugs. And so I think they appreciate that our firm, really cares about them, and we treat them like people when that's unfortunately not always the case, and how they're treated.
Yeah, I mean, you put it in a way that it's very difficult to argue, regardless of where you are politically, where your personal thoughts are, that treating fellow human beings as human beings, as such, with dignity, with respect, is the starting point. That should be our baseline, and that's the level of care and the level of respect where we should start. And I know we had talked about this before, but besides that, there's financial implications for taxpayers who may not be. You can say, well, that's fine, but this doesn't concern me. I don't have relatives, I don't have friends in that world, so I shouldn't be bothered with this. But why should kind of everybody open their eyes to see the situation? Why is this important to more people than are kind of aware of what's going on right now?
Okay. Yeah, it does implicate taxpayers. And and I have had some really awful cases that have been in the press, and people are like, oh my gosh, that was an awful case. And that's kind of the first thing. But then they turn the page, and then they don't, and like you said, it doesn't really affect them. And even if it did, where do you start? So that's part of it, like what's an individual supposed to do? And but here's the financial. The contracts are massive. And New Mexico, the current contractor is getting paid 70, 80 million a year. And we only have like 5,000 inmates in the whole state. And there's a contractor that used to be in the state that got a $1.4 billion contract in Missouri. And so that's the baseline. But then the way the contract's written here, and I have no reason to expect it's written differently in any other state, is if a say one of these contractors, if there's a brewing infection, one of our cases, there's a brewing infection, and they need to send them out for an MRI or CT scan or tissue sampling or something like that. They don't have capability on site at the prisons to do that. If they send them out, they have to pay the full cost of that. And so they don't send them out. But if that same inmate a month later is on the brink of death, needs to go to the hospital, they send them to the hospital, they get checked in for 24 hours or more, Medicaid picks up the bill. So that's level 2. So, if the person dies, at that point, the taxpayers are kind of off the hook. But a lot of these guys are young, 20s, 30s, 40s max. Every now and then we get people older than that, but they may live another 20, 30, 40 years. They have permanent spine damage, permanent heart damage. They're missing limbs, so they're going to have permanent, lifetime medical care, again, at the cost of Medicaid. That's strike three for taxpayers. And that ain't it. Because most of these guys did manual labor. And even if they hadn't, even if they had been an investment banker, coming out of prison, you don't have a lot of job options. You're probably going to be working in manual labor. So, and they can't do that because you can't do manual labor if you're missing limbs, you have a permanently damaged spine, a permanently damaged heart. That's more than strike three, and that's strike four for taxpayers. And then so there's and then there's other things that I probably not addressing, but those costs mount up. And since privatized medical care went into the prisons, and it started in the early 90s or started gaining ground, imagine what those costs are. There are prisoners probably from 1990 that suffered injuries from lack of medical care that are still on Medicaid, and still getting medical care for a damaged spine or a damaged heart. And no one has ever made that calculation. And for the life of me, I don't know why the states, the counties, or the feds don't say, hey, wait a second, this is really expensive. This ain't 140, this isn't 1.4 billion. This is probably hundreds of billions over the span of time. And no one has studied that. And we're trying to get to the bottom of it here. But it's me. I'm one lawyer and a staff, and then we do co-counsel with some other firms here. But it's not easy getting information from the prisons or their contractors. It's a slugfest. I mean, you have to fight over every scrap of paper, and we do. But it's I mean, you got to fight for every ounce of evidence and every document, and so we're trying to unravel all that. But I don't think unless the legislature gets involved, well, taxpayers will never know the true cost of these medical contracts. So I don't know. I kind of ramble a little bit. I hope I answered your question.
And I think you addressed it from plenty of different angles, why it would make sense for the average taxpayer, the average person to have a vested interest to know what's going on in their prison, because even if it doesn't connect to them on a human level, that there's a financial incentive, or there's a financial reason that will impact them. One thing that really has struck me as you talk about these situations is when we discuss infections, a lot of that seems like, if proper precautions are taken, that you can avoid a lot of that situation. And that this seems like a very systemic issue, that if there were changes made uh, on a systemic level, that you could maybe avoid, if not all of this, most of these traumatic outcomes. Is there anything that you have seen in the last few years on a scale that you would say, if we just did A, B, or C, or put this one thing into place, we could avoid a lot of these headaches, a lot of these terrible situations, these terrible outcomes for these prisoners?
Well, there's a few things like the local jail here has a just horrible track record over the since 2019. There have been a couple of contractors go through there. There have been well over 20 deaths during that period. And the University of New Mexico is taking over medical care next month. And I'm really optimistic about that. And so I think it would be great if universities around the country take over medical in the prisons, because, they may mess up now and then, but it's not going to rise to the level of civil rights violations where they're deliberately denying care to people and they're refusing to do a CT scan or a tissue sample or something pretty nominal to determine whether these the infection is there, and if it's getting worse, and then provide the proper antibiotic therapy to make sure that it's managed and it doesn't grow into a life-threatening infection. The other thing is they could actually send the people out. and not go through corporate approvals, to send a prisoner out for, a CT scan or an MRI or something like that because they're trying to save on cost. But that's not how it happens. They have these, it's called utilization review. And, the doctors on site, even if they want to send a guy to the ER, they can't do that without, well, the ER, I think they can if the guy's on the brink of death. But if it's like for a CT scan or MRI or tissue sample, they have to go through a corporate approval process that doesn't necessarily even involve medically trained personnel. It's like an insurance model, where you put the stuff in, and it's kind of, I think it's like health insurance companies, they have their algorithms that are designed to deny coverage. And I think, there's a lot of that. So you get rid of that, give the on-site medical personnel the ability to send people out, do proper testing, and without corporate, accountants or whoever's making these decisions to intervene and stop the referral. And then I'll give you a really good example. They could stop slashing costs. And we have a couple of suicide cases or not suicide cases, detox cases from the local jail here. And well, we have 4 death cases. And no one should ever die of detox. You die from detox from dehydration, and then you have heart failure. And the there's current contractor that's on its way out, and UNM is coming in. And then there was a prior contractor that came in. The prior contractor, got rid of the paramedics, got rid of the EMTs, got rid of epinephrine, which is the most important tool in the, tool chest when you're dealing with an inmate that's crashing in detox. It gets their heart going again. And epinephrine, I don't know what it costs. It probably costs a couple of bucks at that level. And they discontinued epinephrine. And we have testimony from the medical people on that. And then even if they did have epinephrine, they didn't have EMTs or paramedics that were trained to administer the epinephrine. My daughter's had an EpiPen since she was 5. And so, you can give an EpiPen to a 5-year-old and send them kindergarten, but you can't administer epinephrine when there's an inmate crashing in detox. And consequently, they've had, well, I don't know for sure because we, it's not easy, like I said, getting these numbers, but they've had, at least 23 deaths at that jail, and quite a few of those have been detox deaths. So, and that's cost related. They don't want to pay for the paramedics. They don't want to pay for the EMTs. They don't want to pay for even epinephrine. And then, and then that was continued with the successor, medical provider who's leaving now, and but it just got worse. So it's get rid of the profit. I guess the long and short of it is get rid of the profit motive, and prison medical care, because it's all profit driven entirely. And these are massive companies, 500 million, a billion, some of them owned by private equity firms or hedge funds. And, it's totally profit driven. And when you have a profit driven medical care system and you're dealing with extremely vulnerable people that have no voice, you just assume you're going to get away with it. And, as far as I know, no one, definitely not in this state, has ever gone after them on the scale that we've gone after them. Because, and we're not stopping until they change, until they either improve their practices or they get out of the business. And I don't care which, but, one way or another, they're either going to start doing their jobs or, it's going to be very costly for them.
I mean, when you put it in those terms, that just taking care of other humans and then people who are in power, positions of power and or control, just to do what they are hired, what they are paid to do, it doesn't seem all that difficult. But I can tell as you talk about this, I could easily ask you questions for another 30 minutes, if not longer. because of your passion, because of your conviction and your commitment to this. But we are coming up on time, so I'll kind of change gears for a moment as we wrap up. I know for most of us, when we do something a little different, go someplace for the first time, it can stick with us, or we have a picture in our mind what it's like even before you started working on these cases. Do you remember the first time you walked into a prison? Were you nervous at all? What was that like? And what was your first encounter with the jail, if you can remember as a lawyer?
Well, the first time I got into a prison was when I started doing this work, and to be honest, I was worried about the inmates. I, when you're walking toward a row, they walk in rows basically, or columns, and you're walking toward them, and you have these preconceptions about what prisoners are like. I was worried about that, but not anymore. Now I, you know, worry a little bit more about the administration and, you know, like for instance, I went in that same inmate with the pressure ulcer. I took my camera in. He said his sore was oozing. So I wanted to take pictures. They wouldn't let me take pictures. And then anyway, they called the gang unit, and the gang unit came to escort me out, and then they filed a bunch of false reports saying that I threatened them and just all kinds of nonsense. And these are big dudes, they're like paramilitary guys, and there's like 7 or 8 of these guys to escort me out of the prison. And then I'm just like huffing and puffing trying to get to the front office, because I'm thinking, man, I'm gonna get my ass whipped. And then they had 2 cars escort me from the parking lot out the front gate. It was just the craziest thing. So after that, ever since then, I've taken a witness. I take someone from my office to be there as a witness. And so the prisoners, don't bother me. The guards don't really bother me. But when the administration pipes in and says, don't let him take pictures, which is what I think happened, and then they send in the gang unit, because it wasn't the guard that escorted me back there. He was perfectly nice, and I think he was probably surprised. But they send in the gang unit, or the serious threat intelligence unit, as they call it, and have me escorted. That was yeah, that caused me a little concern. But now I have a witness, and what are you going to do? I'm not going to stop going to see them. They need, I need to see them. I need to see if they're injured. I need to take pictures if they do have injuries, and so I'll just keep doing my job. But that's 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 it, really.
That's a good story in terms of something to tell. Maybe not all that good for you in the moment, but thank you for sharing that with us. As you wrap up, Parrish, is there anything I didn't ask you that I probably should have?
Um, Let me think. I guess how can people help? Which I would say, contact your legislators. Demand that they study the true cost of prisons and jails. Prisons in the state and jails in whatever county they're in, because they don't know the true cost. And I think if they knew the true cost and knew that every paycheck there was, possibly a significant amount coming out of their paycheck to pay for this, I think people would be a little bit more attentive. So I would say write your legislators and say, get control over this, and study the cost. As a taxpayer, I deserve and I have a right to know where my tax dollars are going, and I want the state and the counties need to study this. So that's what I would suggest. Just assert your rights as a taxpayer, because this money could be going elsewhere. It could be going to schools. It could be going to private medical health care. It could be going all over the place, but it's being squandered in the prisons, and it's not right. And the corrections departments in states, typically have some of the largest budgets in the state, and so that money could be better utilized elsewhere, maybe even mental health care. That sounds crazy, but why not, put some of that toward private, medical or mental health care out in the community, because they're not getting it once they get to prison. And and schools, the things that are important, and not, to line a massive corporations pockets. That's what I would say.
I'm really glad you put that in there. It doesn't sound crazy at all when you kind of have that one line takeaway that this money doesn't need to be squandered. There are better uses for it. And at the very least, we can all agree on that, there's no reason for the situation that these people are in, and there are better ways that these systems can be run, and the resources can be better allocated to either prevent the situation altogether, and on top of that can be put at other places for better uses. Parrish, if our listeners want to connect with you, want to learn more, where can they do that?
Well, we started a nonprofit. The website's not up yet. It's called prisonlights, .org. So that should be up in the next week or so. And then I think you have my link to all the cases we filed in your show notes. And then they can contact me through my website, or but I would, encourage them to keep an eye out for Prison Lights, because the whole premise of that nonprofit is to shine a light on, prisons, and how it's the prison medical care in particular. But that's kind of our first challenge, medical care. But then we're going to be addressing other issues as well. One of those issues is cost. I want to unwrap, if no one else is going to do it, then we want to do our best to kind of figure out what is this costing us. And I can tell you, my gut feeling is it's not billions. It's much higher than that. So, and anyway, so prisonlights.org. And then otherwise, you can see, I don't have all the cases we filed on that link on my website. I just haven't had time to get them up there, but it'll give you a sampling of the kind of issues we're seeing, and they just keep coming and coming and coming. There's no change. It's remarkable, as many times as we've sued them, and it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. It's almost like they're taking, they, it's just like, all right, you sued me, just wait till you see this, and then we have to sue them again. And it's just it's insanity. But if that's what they want to do, I'm glad to keep suing them. So
Well, I mean, you certainly are the right man for this job, because you have the passion and you have the commitment to see it through. So I will post all of those links you discussed in the show notes. Uh, Listeners, please reach out to your legislators with your thoughts, at the very least, with the cost. This is something that we all should have a better awareness of. And Parrish, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a good talk.
yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate your interest in this topic. I really appreciate it.